Thanks to Judy and Ryan and Task Force and everybody that helped put this thing together. I know there's some advantages and disadvantages to doing it remotely. Hopefully a lot more people, can watch the presentations, but for those of us giving the presentations, it's a little bit hard without seeing the audience. So, feel free to interrupt me with questions, send them to Judy or Ryan, or you can even send them just to my email there and I'll answer you. I don't really have a train of thought. It's more like one of those guys pushing those seesaws on the individual cars. So interrupting is not going to make this presentation any better or worse. So put my contact information there. Hopefully, if you're going to download the slide later, feel free to use me as a resource. So with that, I didn't coordinate this with Mike Johnson, but I'm also starting my presentation with ITD and ITD Journey. My time aren't quite as parsed as Mike Johnson's are, but before I got here, before my time, we just checked heavy trucks over trouble bridges. It wasn't a robust routing or rating effort. It was more of a, can we get this truck over this bridge? In the 90s, we started a kind of a more complicated system of factor screening, so the DMV could determine which permits needed to have a bridge analysis, and then the bridge office also did factor screenings to determine which of the trucks or which of the bridges needed to have analysis, all in an effort to reduce the amount of bridge analysis we had to do a week because we just didn't have the manpower. So that basically consisted of us doing 50 to 70 permits a week for bridge analysis. Another 300 or so permits got screened by the DMV for factor and were issued without any kind of restrictions. That typically added up to us analyzing about 300-400 bridges a week. And this was nearly a 2-person equivalent job. So we have contracted for an automated permitting system, and we've been working for the last 3 years on getting that squared away. And I've been holding it off, but starting tonight, I wanted to coordinate this with this presentation. Starting tonight at 7 o'clock, we're going to have every over legal permit analyzed on every bridge on the route. So it's all self-issue system. The truckers can create routes, enter truck. See, there's the advantage of us being remote. When I clear my throat or if I have a coughing fit or something, you guys don't have to go running for the hills. So the truckers can enter all this manually. They enter their routes, they enter their truck configuration. It does the full bridge analysis and self-issues permits. This typically takes about 5 minutes. We've had this, even though the system's going into full production mode tonight, we've had it running in the background for about 8 months, working out kind of the bugs and the kinks. We know that it's doing about 400 permits a week. That includes about 25,000 bridge analysis a week. And the bridge hours have gone down to about 15 to 20 hours a week and decreasing under this new system. What we're still doing is if the truck permit is over 250,000 pounds, that still requires a bridge analysis approval. And then there's certain instances or weights or configurations that dump out to manual, and we run those permits as well as non-standard gauge. So that's what we're doing in our 15 to 20 hours a week, as well as some QA still. So one thing here is kind of the output of our automated permitting program, and I'm going to kind of start with it so you can see where we're going, and then the rest of this I tried to tailor to be kind of a more generalized, so you're looking to do an automated permitting system and what kind of questions do you need to get answered. So this is a spreadsheet. So every time a permit gets run and a bridge analysis get run, whether or not it requires an approval, it produces one of these bridge studies. That's what this is called. So on this is the list of bridges that the that the truck crosses on the permit. Some things of note are we have several different rating methods we use, and I'll go over those a little bit later, but this LRT is the load rating tool, and then some of these have no restrictions, and some of them are rated by table. And then there's additional lane requirements that are put on certain bridges. So that's kind of what I wanted to show for that. So a lot of you are probably saying, I do bridge design, or I do load rating, and I don't have anything to do with permits. And to that I say, lucky you. But every so often, somebody's going to come to you and say, we need an automated permitting system. And after 3 years and about 4 years previous to that, going through these systems and trying to evaluate systems, I'm going to try to give you some tips on how to answer these questions. So the first question and answer that you really need to determine for yourself is, does my state need a routing system or a rating system? And I'll tell you from experience that a lot of the vendors out there don't even really know the difference between these two things. But a routing system is where you have capacities for bridges, or max gross vehicle weights for bridges, or max factors for bridges. And when you come across one of those bridges, you just route around it. So if you're in Pennsylvania, not an AASHTO member state, I looked it up before this presentation, not that I'm making fun of them, they have a lot more roads than we do, but to be noted here, Pennsylvania looks like a grid, Idaho does not. So if you're in Pennsylvania and a truck can't get across these two bridges, well, there's a route where you can just route yourself around those two bridges, and you don't really need a rating system. You know, you can probably get most of your overweight permitting across your state using routing, and that can be as simple as every bridge has a factor, every permit has a factor, and it's just a numbers comparison, and that's a pretty easy permitting system, right? It doesn't have to interact with BrR. It basically takes a table of your bridges and uses Google to make a map. And this is what a lot of the companies out there marketing overweight permitting, this is what they plan on creating for your state. And maybe that's appropriate for your state. And if it is, you can probably get away with things a lot cheaper and a lot easier than we did. But if you look at Idaho, if you have a couple of bridge restrictions in the state, well, you just can't get across. So if you couldn't get here and you couldn't get here, welcome to Canada or welcome to Nevada, because you're not getting across Idaho. So the priority in Idaho for permitting has always been to try and come up with restrictions that can get a truck across the bridge, not try and route overweight traffic around our interstate system, because we don't have a whole lot. We got 2 east-west routes and we got 1 north-south route. So in Idaho, the priority is to come up with restrictions that allow a truck to get across the roads rather than try and get them around bad bridges. So this is really the fundamental question, that if your state is considering putting together an automated permitting system, this is the fundamental question that you need to ask yourself and understand the difference between. The next big group of questions that you're going to have to answer is, what kind of thresholds do you want the system to self-issue? What is your max weight or max factor, or however else you classify trucks? What is the maximum for self-issuance to the system without any bridge people taking a look at it before it goes out? What is the maximum weight period that you want to try and put through the system? Is there certain million-pound vehicles, 800,000-pound vehicles that you don't want to go through the system at all, and you want them calling the DMV to get a permit or doing other means? That's something you need to decide. What you're going to do with non-standard gauge vehicles. Decisions that need to be made as you're approaching starting an automated permitting system. So I wanted to dive in here, and you know that a slide is going to be awesome when someone has taken a picture of an equation and put it in there, so that you already know that this slide and the next slide are awesome, because look at the amount of work that I put into this. So truck factors, bridge factors, they're at their heart a quick screening tool to get an idea of a bridge's capacity and get an idea of a truck's load. A good factor should combine the axle weights and spacings, because just gross vehicle weight doesn't get you very far to understanding what the effect on a bridge is going to be. So at ITD, we use a recombination of Federal Formula B. So I've added Federal Formula B, another indication that it's going to be an awesome presentation. Someone included Federal Formula B. So this basically determines whether a truck is over legal or not. So if a truck's over 80,000 pounds, it's over legal. But if a truck is under 80,000 pounds and it doesn't meet this equation, it is also over legal and needs a permit. So we basically rearranged this equation, and maybe a lot of states do it this way. I really don't know. As I was putting this together, I have no clue if all of you do this exact same thing or no one's ever done this before. I don't know if I'm the first man on the moon or like the 100th here. So anyways, we've just rearranged this equation. This 500 here is basically a bridge factor. This Federal Formula B saying if a truck's over a factor of 500, it's over legal. So we've just recombobulated it to determine with a truck weight, axle spacing, and the number of axles, what the factor is. So if you like this slide, this next slide, it's for you, because there's two handwritten equations that I've written out. So the way we determine a truck factor is, and I'll start with this easy one, this type 3, this Idaho. These are the Idaho legal trucks. They're loosely based on AASHTO legal trucks, I'm told. But for this first truck, this type 3, the trouble here is the reason why this gets complicated, and the reason why I only did the calculations for the first truck, is you have to do this for all the different axle combinations. So while this one's 2 equations, this one is 3, 4 equations, and this one's, I can't even count them, 7 probably. Anyways, take the weight. This is kind of confusing diagram because it's in tons and not kips, and so I've converted it for you. So the entire vehicle weight is 54,000 pounds. It's got 3 axles, and its factor turns out to be 580 for the whole truck. Now, if you just do the factor for this back group here with a 4-foot spacing, you get a factor of 556. So for a truck, you calculate all the different factors and take the highest one. So for a bridge, to determine the bridge factor, we run the bridge through Vertus, we get an operating rating, and we get a rating factor for the type 3. So if you times the 580 factor times the rating factor, you get a bridge factor. And then of this one, you take the lowest of them. So this is using the factor for the type 3. This one's using the factor for the type 3S2. This one's using the factor for the type 3.3, and it is determined that this bridge factor is 1007. So if you calculate a truck factor at 980, it should be able to pass. If you calculate a factor of 1080, it probably needs some kind of restrictions. So this system is quick and simple and inherently conservative. And it also has problems sometimes because these trucks are legal variations of trucks, and most of the trucks that we get are over legal permit trucks, and they look a little different. So ITD is actually in the process of trying to make our factor system more sophisticated. I know what you're saying. So Jake, you just told me that ITD has spent 3 years putting together an automated permitting system. Why do you need factors? You still need them. You still need some kind of screening tool. There's going to be bridges you can't use Vertus or BrR with, and the factors is still a handy system. If you're coming up with a screening system, this might be all you need. So next step in determining what you need and what you need to put together for your automated permitting system is to know your inventory. So certain of these bridges in your state system, what we found is, so I had been doing permitting for several years, and when I went to put together all the state bridges for the automated permitting system, there were some that we'd never rated before and we never even looked at before because they're on off system or they're on the state system, but they're very rarely permitted. So, and some of them we didn't have BRR ratings, and some of them we can't do BRR ratings for. So for those, you need to come up with tables, rules, some kind of Excel sheet, engineering judgments. And then for your bridges with load ratings and BRR, there's a lot of different flavors that they come in, right? You got your load rating tool. You got ones that need to be run LFD member alternative, ones that need to be run LRFR, ones that need to be checked out to run. So for each bridge in your state system, understanding which of these alternatives it's using is probably a great first step. So like I said, we don't have BRR ratings for all of our bridges. Certain types it doesn't input very well. Certain types, we just have an old legacy software like BrRs, like Mike Johnson was talking about. So here's a couple of examples of what we use for rules and tables. So this one's just based on a truck's length and weight, and then finds a class of restrictions based on the length and weight. This is based on the HS20 design vehicle, just extended longer, essentially. We have other bridges where just the weight determines the restriction. And then we have other bridges where the factor determines the restriction. So just the factor screening led to a lot of bridges popping out for manual analysis. And so we came up with these factor tables where you could use the factor for the truck to come to any of these restrictions. So that was helpful for our system. Within AASHTO or BrR, you have several alternatives here. Your load rating tool, which is awesome for automated permitting. I'll talk some more about organizing your data, but it works as promised. It can do thousands of analyses in a second, and for permitting, it works great. It's got some limitations on the types that it runs, including LRFR, which is going to be one of the fixes or one of the enhancements of 7.2. So I'm looking forward to that. I know you states that do LRFR are really looking forward to that. I added this 3D FEM. We're getting a couple bridges now that have to be rated this way. And so there's a lot of different types. From our automated permitting project, the load rating tool stuff ran like a top. The LFD member alternative stuff ran like a top. But these two, LRFR and checkout to run, were buggy in 6.8.4. And when they came out with 7.0, something that was snuck in that you probably didn't even know about was there's an ability now to connect and turn all these dials, as Tim would say, for all these different types of ratings now. So that's one thing that wasn't in there before that is now, that is pretty crucial for automated permitting, is the ability to interact with BRR to do all these different types of ratings. But knowing which one's which and how to rate is important, and that's important to keep track of. So one of the things we did at ITD to try and demystify this, because we have a lot of different people here that do these bridge analyses, we wanted them to be done in a consistent manner. So we added some custom agency fields. So if you're in the bridge workspace and you click on the bridge key number there, you get this tabs, and if you go all the way over to this custom agency field, you can set these and enter them. So we have this field called load rating tool, and it's just a yes or no field. And then we have this second field called permit type, which basically breaks it down into these categories that you saw here previously. So the automated permitting system and any engineers here are meant to run them the same way. So this helps to impose a little bit of consistency. And then when you get another advantage of adding a custom agency field and making it a yes, no is then you can make a folder for the load rating tool files based on that attribute. And this is really handy because you can take this whole folder and run it in a couple seconds. So if you're doing testing, it's a great first blush look at how things are, how things are looking. If you compare the load rating tool to the previous version and this version, you can get a quick look. This could be helpful if you're doing annual permits, because you can take a truck and run it over all the load rating tool bridges at one time and get your restrictions. So you need to keep one thing. If you're doing load rating, we have this in ITD, we have this folder called completely defined, and it's a folder that always has the most up-to-date load rating tool file meant to be used for permitting. And so I think this isn't, maybe everybody uses this completely defined, not completely defined, but it's important when you have lots of people doing load rating to have a folder that's dedicated where people aren't making copies and whatnot. So keeping this up to date and organized is an important part of load rating. So I know if you've been with this group for a while, you know that ITD has been pushing this load rating tool for a long time. So I wanted to add some slides kind of specifically to it and how to manage your load rating tool data. So just like with the BrR data, this is something that can get out of date really quick and start to become cumbersome to your load rating. So we review all of our load rating tools files every month, create new load rating tool files for new structures, delete them for old structures, and update it for any changed. And if you're thinking to yourself, that sounds like a lot of work, it's not really, because one of the things that was included when the load rating tool came out, and maybe you know about this tool, maybe you don't, is this ability to help you maintain your load rating tool files. So if you're in your Bridge Explorer and you click on this pre-computed data tab, you get this generate and maintain. If you go over to this maintain, I actually think that this didn't work in 6.8.4 because I was trying to do it in 6.8.4 and had some troubles, but it could have been just me. I'm a troublemaker, but it definitely works in 7.0. And so this is your whole list of your load rating tool files, and you just hit this select outdated and then update selected, it'll just select all and run them. So it's a pretty simple tool. It just looks at when the pre-computed data was created and when the bridge was modified. And if the bridge was modified after it was created, then it just knows it's out of date and you do it. So you run that to keep them up to date. So that's a simple tool that you may or may not know about. And then within the load rating tool, that slide's a perfect title because the load rating tool does rule, but there's also has rules. So that's more specifically what it's about. So if you're in your Bridge Explorer and you go to this configuration tab, you go all the way to the bottom of this system defaults, and then there's tabs here. You go all the way to the side, you get to this rating tool tab, and here's where you set your tree of restrictions. So it will run it the first time, and if it passes, it'll get an okay rating. If it doesn't pass, it'll run it with 69% impact, which is our rule for 45 mile an hour restriction, 25 mile an hour 5, and then it goes to single vehicle 45, 25, 5. So one of the advantages of the rating tool, if you don't know this, is it will run through all these at once rather than making you, if you're using BrR and it doesn't run without restrictions, then you need to go in and manually change the impact. With the load rating tool, it runs through all these instantaneously. So that's a real advantage for permitting. It actually works that way. If you take non-load rating tools and run them through the rating tool, it'll run them several times and come up with the proper restrictions too. So another tip in case you didn't know that. So we send our automated permitting vendor data updates quarterly. So this might not seem like often enough to you, and it may not be, but the testing to make sure that your information has been properly transferred is pretty cumbersome. I wouldn't want to do the big data switch any more than once every quarter. And so every quarter we send them a backup of our BrR database, a zip file of our load rating tool files, and a spreadsheet with inventory information on all of our state bridges and how to rate them, any additional rules, any tables that go along with them. If we have issues in between, if we have an emergency, if we have a load rating that's changed, we can make changes via our 511 restriction system. We can put weight restrictions on that, or we can send new bridge models and have them updated. But again, we try not to do that piecemeal, and it does take a lot of testing to make sure you're right. So speaking of testing, I thought I would run through kind of the testing methods we came up with to assure that our automated permitting system is operating properly. So these are kind of levels of testing. We do this 120, we do the 121 first. It basically runs a 121K truck over every state bridge in the system. And then it produces that bridge study that I showed you previously. And with that, we can make sure that for every state bridge, the rating method is correct and the operating rating result is correct. So basically, if we can't get through that test, then there's no point in going to the next test. And that's the way these tests are kind of set up. So the next level of testing is the 240K test, and we would run the 240K truck. It's basically the 121 doubled, as you might imagine, over all the state bridges. But this time we're looking for something different. I don't look at the rating method, and I don't really look at the operating results because I assume they're the same after it passes the 121 test. But here we're trying to match the speed and lane requirements. So if I'm running this 240K truck and I'm getting a 45-mile-an-hour restriction, I want our permitting system to get the same 45. And so this is kind of this second level of testing to make sure that they get the right ratings, and then it makes the right decision based on those ratings. So that's kind of the two separations. And then we do side-by-side permits where we run permits manually and make sure that they match the route and ratings and requirements that the system hits. So we've run through these tests, 6 or 8 times over a few years to try and make sure that we're getting the right numbers with data updates. And then for the past 8 months or so, we've been doing these side-by-side testings to make sure that we get all these little issues run through. Okay, so here's kind of when we do those testing. So when we were doing the initial system setup, we did the 121K test, the 240K test, and then the side-by-side. When we do data updates, we do the 121 and the 240. And then when we're doing our ongoing QA, we just keep doing these side-by-side tests. And then while the system's in production, we're real-time. We're looking for any error bridges that are coming up, bridges where results are expected, but the system's not returning any. These could trip up a lot of permits really quick. So that's something we keep an eye on. And then we're always monitoring for failed and manual results bridges that are causing problems to our system. So, hopefully that was a brief overview of the things that you might be looking for when you're trying to set up an automated permitting system. Some of the quick things we've learned over the last few years, and how we test and monitor our system. So, with that, I'll open it up to any questions, and maybe Judy and Ryan want to make it more open for all the questions that have been being asked. I didn't see any questions specifically for me in the chat.
Yeah, Jake, thank you. Like Jake said, we're just going to jump into the questions. So if you have any more questions, Jake, I don't think there's any specifically for you. The few that came through during your presentation, I guess you're lucky here, is just if everything will be made available after, and we're going to post the recording at the ash2ourbridge.org website. So this recording will be there so you can rewatch Jake's presentation if you're interested. And with that, we had 2 other questions. think the first one, Mike, is for you, and it was from Rodney Roberts. He looks like he's left, but let's still answer that question just in case he decides to listen to the recordings. And the question was, are you using ExpressPass load permit program?
Yeah, the ExpressPass is a similar program. It's the Mississippi version of what we're doing. What Jake was talking about was the permitting program that ProMiles prepared for Idaho. I don't know if they're exact the same. I don't know what the differences are. That would probably be a better question to ask Tim Pilcher of ProMiles. But yes, it is the same basic system.
Thanks, Mike. And then I think, Julianne, you had one question, and then we're going to come back to Jake because you're not going to get away too easy, Jake. There's a bunch of questions coming for now. But Julianne, from Paul Jensen, the question is BRDR reporting. How will the data format be presented for agency custom formatted output? Based on the information presented, the information will be a general format. Currently, the data output is XML, and report format is by the agency to fit their requirements.
Yeah, so that's a pretty specific question that I won't have specific answers to just yet because we're still in the conceptual phase, but we're hoping that the format of the reports would be kind of similar in the tabular fashion that I showed in my presentation, and then it's the content that would be customizable. So we're hoping that the reports will, you know, quote unquote, look and feel the same between any agency specific template, which, you know, is not really provided in the software right now because most of the customizations are like kind of cut and paste done outside of the software. So it's our intent that everything will look the same and feel the same, but that the content provided, be it the actual tables for inputs and outputs, and then the actual attributes for those tables would be either included or not included for each of the potential tables from like a source table, either input, dead load, live load, output, that sort of thing. So I'm not sure if that answered your question. You're welcome to you know, shoot me an email if I didn't quite get you what you were looking for.
Hey Julianne, this is Jeff. I can add on to that. Can you guys hear me?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is Jeff. So I think maybe Paul, maybe what you're asking too from a more technical standpoint is that you have the ability to parse the current XML based reports, and if we move to like a PDF based report, you wouldn't have that same ability. And I would argue that's probably going to be the case. One thing is that I don't think our and I don't know if you're asking this question, but the one thing is our XML reports were never meant to be kind of like an API or something that was meant to be directly consumed. Although you could do that, it was never really the intent of them. One of the goals of our of the modernization was to put more things in the API to make it more flexible for, you know, our own tools, but also for third-party development, but also you know, just it's better software practice. And one of those things that as I've been talking to people on the report tags, such as Julianne and Vinex, our goal is to rework some of the subsystem in the reporting side and the engine side of the software, so that we can maybe put some of the results put more of the results in the API, modularize it better, and also give it so then third parties could consume it, or we could consume it for our own use, but also the report tool could then consume it. So that would be a much better approach for allowing people to get, if you need to do something custom for your state or for your organization, you know, we could expose it in an API form as opposed to these old legacy XML formats. So, you know, it's a little different angle from what Julianne was talking about, but you know, one of the goals, I guess, of the new report tool is going to be to use the new report, like, you know, use more modern approaches such as PDFs and maybe even Word documents or Excel, you know, to be able to output the data as opposed to just doing it in XML format.
Great, thank you, Jeff. And Ryan, we did kind of have one other question I was going to lump in with this response, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we also got some questions about why all of the requests from the 2013 tag were not included in BRDR at that time. And I just wanted to kind of clarify that it was a combination of a few things, you know, resources, time, and relative importance were among the top reasons, but also we wanted to complete the modernization project first so that we would minimize the amount of rework needed for the report tools. So now that the modernization project is completed, now we can kind of, like Jeff said, work from the ground up in our new modernized software and approach so that we weren't trying to update outdated reporting functions. But also, you know, just like I listed in my presentation, the new tag has come up with a whole laundry list of new requests and needs, and we understand that not all of those are going to be possible. You know, we're constrained by the infrastructure of the software, what's doable within our budget and resources, and you know, that's why we've included close coordination between ProMiles and the task force. But ultimately, the tag and the task force are the ones that decide what will be included in the new report generation tool. So, you know, that's why we urge our users to put their requests into JIRA, because we can't consider them if we don't know the need. And then just to kind of piggyback on what Jeff mentioned earlier today, any consultant users should really contact the state agencies that they work for and coordinate their requests within JIRA that way. So hopefully that answered those questions as well.
Thanks, Julianne. There might be one more here for you. It says, this comes from David Wolf. It says, do you expect that the report tool templates in their new report tool will be sensitive to the structure type, input reporting and output reporting?
Yes, that was definitely something that we want to have. I know that creates more work on ProMile's side, but you know, that's something that I personally have wanted as well, because you really need to capture all of the different inputs and outputs for that specific structure type. So when you try to have like one blanket template, you just can't capture everything, or you end up with a lot of things that are NA or blank. And that's what we have right now in some of the outputting reports or BWS reports. And we'd really like to clean that up. And I think the way to do it is to have separate reports based on the individual member type and superstructure type. So that is our goal.
Thanks, Joanne. And then just staying with the reporting, Jeff, did you see question number 9 that came in from Paul? I don't know if you wanted to address that now before we switch over.
Sure, let me read. I was scrolled up a little bit there in the list. Let me read it 1 second. Will that be better documented to install the BRR so that the user will not have to work outside of BRR? I'm not sure exactly. Will that be better documented to install the BRR so that the user will not have to work outside the BRR? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking there, Paul. So the new report tool that Julianne is talking about will be integrated within the user interface. If you want to consume our API, if that's what you're asking, I'm not sure. There's another question came in about the functionality. Is that maybe Paul? Maybe I just can't answer your question with that. I'm not sure.
I had a question 8 too, that is talking about a sheet style.
Okay, let me see. Currently, the user can use a style sheet to read the data and output for the format. Yeah, okay. So for that, yeah. So we're going to probably move away from that approach, and we're going to use a more like inbuilt reporting mechanism that will allow you, instead of requiring the user to have to do XSLT or something that's more, and XSLT, I mean, it's kind of going away, right? I mean, it's not as common anymore. And having the end user have to like figure out the coding. What we're looking more is like for like a WYSIWYG type report generator. We're actually experimenting with some third-party products right now that we can kind of just throw in there. We would develop some modules to toss in there, and you could drag and drop things onto your report, and then you could format the header how you want to put your logo on there, and it would look kind of like a PDF or like a document, like a Word document, and then you could save that template, and then you could generate those reports on the fly. And so that way anybody could generate reports that get kind of familiar with that user interface. They wouldn't have to generate their own XSLT files. And it would also give you more flexibility, because even with the XSLT files, you're still limited on the style. You know, it doesn't really allow you to pull out and add in with a strong degree, I guess, of flexibility to add and remove a lot of data, I guess I should say.
I just unmuted Paul. So Paul, did you want to add to your question or your explanation?
Well, yeah, what was going on is what I've seen in the past. You know, I've been with this product since '95, so you know we've gone through this report problem. This is probably the 10th time we've gone through this problem, and it keeps coming back to making sure that the user doesn't have to leave the product. I mean, that was the problem with the Crystal reports, was having to leave the product to run something. And the style sheet thing sort of works relatively good if you know how to run a style sheet, but that's a pretty technical process, like you were talking about, Jeff. But I think the big ticket thing is being able to make the report writer fit the process of the agency rather than the agency having to adapt to the report writer. And that's where I'm kind of going, and that's always been my big beef with the report writing process, has been, especially within this product, has been the user ends up having to adapt or using some other external tools, using cutting and pasting processes in order to get their final product, which is very onerous, and a lot of times the user doesn't want to do that. And that's the reason why I'm saying, you know, if you have a savvy person at the agency that can take your well-documented API and make it fit their business process within the product, everybody's going to be able to use whatever is available much more effectively than trying to do, you know, if they can't find what they're looking for, cut and pasting stuff out, or if the generic thing doesn't work for them, or they have very specific requirements, that they can make that report very specific to their agency and be able to get this out the door and make sure it fits their business process rather than them readapting their business process to the software.
Paul, great question. And actually that's where I thought you were going with that question, just by, you know, how those questions are coming in. I think.
Yeah, my typing sometimes is atrocious.
Oh, no, that's fine. I'm pretty sure that's where you were headed. So to answer your question, yes, I mean, that's absolutely cool. In fact, when we did the modernization, we opened up a ton of things. The API, I would say going into the modernization, the API is we probably doubled the size of the features that we expose with the modernized software. And that we don't have any plan of stopping. I mean, we're going to continue to add things to the API and allow third-party developers and such as yourself, and also state agencies, like you said, savvy people in the agency, they want to tinker and play with it. Absolutely. I mean, if we give you access to all the data, then you can do whatever you want with that data and put it in whatever format you want. You can do whatever you want with it. And historically, this program was written more in a monolithic way, where you know, when it was smaller and back in the 90s, we didn't have as much knowledge on good architectural practices as we do in 25 years later, 26 years later. You know, we're trying to chip away at this big block. You know, the modernization was a big effort, but it wasn't a total rewrite of the software. And I always try to make people understand that, you know, this is something we have to just work at over time. And the goal of this new report tool will be to have a report tool that's pretty flexible within the user interface of BrR, but at the same time, API-ify, if that's a word, API-ify a lot of the results objects in the engine output and actually make it part of the API, so even third-party engines can can use this, and that will allow us to get direct access to influence lines, or get access to, from an API point of view, get access to schematic diagrams, get access to just the final element analysis results, get access to the spec article results, expose everything.
And also, very importantly, other data that the agency would have that may need to be incorporated into some sort of final documentation that isn't inside of BRR, but it is part of the process, or BRD, that is part of their process.
Yeah, I mean, let me put it this way: everything that, my personal goal, and I think this is the goal of the task force, the long-term goal of the task force, is to do what is in the interests of the states and the users of the product, and expose everything in a way that's in the software in a way that will make it easier to use. And that includes both the human interface and also the software application interface.
Yeah, we're coming back full circle to 1995, where, you know, the software was supposed to be a repository for the definition of a bridge. And then we got sidetracked to build analysis engines because we couldn't find anybody that built a decent analysis engine. And it seems like now that we've got a decent analysis engine in the product that's kind of generic for everything we can do, we're coming back around to making a repository and making it back to what we were originally intending in the product to be, which is a repository, and make it so that it fits the business process of the agency and the bridge owner rather than fit the process of the programmer.
Right. No, absolutely. I think that's going to be the goal, and it's something that we're pushing for. In fact, I just had a conversation with Todd yesterday about this, about something that California brought up. I was just on a call with you know, one of the bridge engineers out in California yesterday, and he brought up an idea, and I said, oh, you know what? That's not part of our API, but that would benefit them a ton, and it would also benefit us. So, you know, we're working towards these goals, Paul, and I think trust me, it's always on our mind. And also the bridge right now. I mean, I don't know if you had a chance to play with the modernized API, but I would definitely encourage you to do that. But anyway, I don't want to take up. We have a third party forum.
Yeah.
And maybe we should take that discussion over there, because there's how many people do we have? We have 200 people on the call, and probably only 10 people care about that conversation. So
yeah,
maybe we can take that.
Yeah, this was something that you, the three there. Phoenix and you and myself were talking about in Tahoe last time we were all standing around in the break room.
Yeah, and like I said, I'll be glad to talk about it next week and even next year in New Orleans, because I think we have big ideas for the API, and we want to keep opening things up and keep adding stuff to the API. So I think maybe any API related questions we should probably take to next week. So I'll turn it back to Julianne, because it seems like there's a few more questions here.
All right, Julianne, I think that's everything that I had for you on here, unless I missed anything. We got about 2 minutes, so I want to save some time here for Jake to answer some of the questions that were asked of him. So, Jake, the first one we have here is question number 4. How do you set impact rules? That's from Andrew.
Okay, let me just go back to that page. So if you're in your Bridge Explorer and you go to configuration here, all the way at the bottom is this system defaults. And then you get to this screen, and on the far tab is a rating tool. So then you just, for each of you put them in the processing order, and then just set your impact here. So this is 100% impact, and then this 5 mile an hour is a 0% impact. And that just repeats for the single lane. So then we just set the single lane and 100% impact to 0. So that's kind of our restriction tree that we go through. And again, most states don't parse it, don't have so many different restrictions, but in Idaho, we just don't have that many roads to get across. So we got to get them across where we can. And then I can read the next one. I saw there was like 3 in a row here. It says, how do you handle a BRR bridge that is causing a problem or rejecting too many? How do you handle a non-BRR bridge that is causing a problem or rejecting too many permits? So that was one of the, so we have some bridges in the state of Idaho that don't have any plans that are concrete, and so we don't know what the reinforcement is. And for those bridges, some of them had fairly low factors, and that's where some of these factor tables come in. So like this bridge only had a factor of 659, but at a 45-mile-an-hour restriction, you can get a 700 factor, and slowly but surely, you can usually get a heavier truck over the bridge. I know that you're asking this question from a load rating perspective, but sometimes bridges have to be repaired also. So that's where the bridge design comes in on some of that. So, we're doing more programming based on bridges that are permit issues or over legal issues. So, we're just collecting these up. We make rules. We try and get them across. If we can't, we route them around, and then we put that bridge on a list for causing problems. And then I saw one more here. Two more, actually. Jake, how many bridges in your inventory? So we have about 1,900 state bridges in our inventory that are in the automated permitting system. And I saw one more. Oh, I'm glad that I got the opportunity to take the mic again, because I did want to mention that a couple years ago, a few of us formed an unofficial subcommittee for permitting, and that right now includes me, Richards Withers from Mississippi, and Mark Swiderski from Indiana. So if you're interested in joining our subcommittee, not that we've done very much as a subcommittee, but a lot of us have the same issues, and we need to pool our resources, to make changes in AASHTO where. So I think it's a good effort, and I'll put my email back up. So this last question said, Jake, how do you handle NSG permits? So our automated permitting system does not handle NSG permits right now. From a functional standpoint, we convert non-standard gauge permits to standard gauges, factoring it, because if it's a 17-foot wide truck, then it's basically two HS20s right next to each other. And so we basically factor a non-standard gauge and make it into the effect of a standard gauge, and then run it through BrR. If you've ever tried to run a non-standard gauge through BrR, it's a big mistake. I think that was it for me that I saw in these questions. Anything else?
You got a few more that are still trickling in. So if you scroll to the bottom, you'll see question 12. It says, when determining permitting using the length of the truck and weight, what about the effect of axle spacing?
So we only have, and I guess it's up, that slide's up right now. We only do this with a couple different bridges, mostly long span bridges that you can get a lot of different axle groups on there. So the effect of the axle spacing is not really included in this. If you had something that was really strange axle spacing, this table might not be appropriate. I think you'd have to take that on a case-by-case basis.
Then did you see question 13 come up?
Let's see. Yep, let's see.
I'm gonna load a few more for you, Jake. They're coming in for you.
Let's see, question 13 looks more like a comment. It says, I was thinking of maybe moving to something refined. We've done that before. The problem with Larsa and more or less anything is you have to dumb it back down again to use it for automated permitting. So, basically, if you can't monkey it into BrR, then it's going to need a rule whether or not you have a more refined system or not. And we have with culverts, so we've had culverts that have come up with low ratings because of fill and stuff, and we've done some candy and type analysis on those to try and increase the rating factor. So yeah, these ones that are on heavily permitted routes that get trip up, we look for ways to refine the load rating analysis, get more capacity out of it, come up with restrictions. We've had ones where it was the outside girder that was the issue, and so with heavier weights, if they stay within the stripe lanes, and so we just try to find ways around those bridges. Unfortunately, rehab's the last tool in the box for us. So bridge factor seems to reward low rating factors. Well, the lower the bridge factor, the lower the capacity it has. So if a bridge came back with a 0.5 rating factor for the Type 3, then yes, it would get a pretty low factor. That would essentially be a bridge that doesn't pass a legal vehicle. So we do have bridges that have factors under 500. We have a couple overpasses that only have a factor of 200 or so, and it's for that exact reason, because when you run the legal bridges, you get low rating factors. So it doesn't reward low rating factors. The lower the bridge factor is a lower capacity for that bridge. Question 15, Jake, what is the issue with NSG and permit trucks? That sounds like a throw to a comedy routine or something. But I don't know what the next sentence of that comedy routine is. I guess I'm not sure what that question means, Paul. What is the issue with the NSG and permit trucks?
So
I wish that they. Go ahead, Paul.
The question is, you made a comment that don't do NSG and permit trucks. I don't know if that's just referencing to the automated system or in general, or have you had some bad experiences that kind of threw that comment out?
Oh yeah, so I entered a non-standard, and maybe people are more sophisticated at this than me, but I entered a non-standard gauge vehicle once into BrR and decided it was a big mistake, because you have to have the wheel contact area, the area between the wheels. I mean, there's just so much more information you have to enter for a non-standard gauge vehicle than you do for a standard gauge vehicle. And at ITD, when I saw that question, I was gonna try and pull it up, our little cheat sheet that we have, but it's load rating and permitting is not rocket science. We get these 3-digit ratings at the end of it, but there's a lot of assumptions that go into them. So converting a non-standard gauge to a standard gauge is a lot easier way to go for us. And if anybody wants to reach out, I can share the kind of the cheat sheet we use to convert a non-standard gauge to a standard gauge. Paul, have you entered a non-standard gauge in BrR before?
Oh, lots of.
Well, see, you're just more sophisticated than me, but you know that there's at least 5 times the inputs, right?
Right. Well, the thing is, maybe is, since you're a real advocate for the automated processes and this permitting stuff, maybe there's some ideas that other people have on maybe streamlining some of that, because a lot of things that load raters do is, they streamline the whole design process down to something that's practical, and some of that's in the non-standard gauge is, I would call, not as practical as you may think it is. And maybe there's some things that your task group can come up with that would streamline the process and make this more of a more usable, functional process rather than such an onerous one, because you got to store those stupid vehicles. It may be only one time you use them, but you got to store them somewhere in order for the stuff to work. That's the one part that really always bugged me about non-standard gauge.
Yeah, they're a pain. And if you're talking about an automating permitting system, I mean, you're basically doubling your amount of effort to accommodate 1% of the trucks that are out there. So when we were setting up our automated permitting system, it was pretty easy. It just wasn't worth it. Those ones just kick out, and we do them the old way for now.
Yeah, there's some of those that I work with, some of the other states that I work with have those in their system, or owners that have them in their system, but they're a vehicle that they see quite a few times that are non-standard gauge, and a lot of the movers are using the same configuration in their dollies and everything else. So those kind of help the process where you can put them in there just like you do all of the standard gauge trucks, the HS20s and all the rest of them. They all have the same configuration, same way they store it in the database. So yeah, that's as long as you keep seeing the same vehicle, it's a useful process. But I agree with you. It's very onerous if you get a one-off vehicle every time.